Okay.
All right, we are live.
Awesome.
Cool. All right, so Nora, for today, I wanted to talk about one of our recent case studies. This is a
Yeah.
longstanding client of ours, and we worked with them for, I think, almost 2 years now, and they're still a client. Yeah, so we do. And they're still a client to this day. And as far as I know, they're one of the earliest Growth Machine clients. So
Yeah.
wondering, can you kind of set the stage for us? Can you describe, what problem they came to us with
Mhm.
and what outcomes they were looking for?
Definitely. Yeah. So, as you said, this is one of our first clients at Growth Machine. He runs a site about ride sharing, and he recognized an opportunity. The first one of the first clients that we, or one of the first sites, I should say, that we worked with on like as Growth Machine was his earlier site, the ride sharing site. So then we worked on that, we grew that. He saw the potential in this work and in content, and really saw this kind of like proof of concept through his first site. We actually worked on a couple of other sites with him that he kind of felt like they weren't really paying off, not because of our work, just because of, he was dabbling in different categories and things like that. So he kept kind of coming back to this first site that was just doing phenomenally well. Content was really paying off for him. And it was the ROI, I don't have the exact numbers, but the ROI was very strong for him. So in that kind of vein, he recognized the opportunity for a similar type of like a very thorough resource site about the gig economy as a whole, because remember the original site was only about ride sharing, and the gig economy in 2018 was just exploding, and it was very new, and people were learning about it and like trying to get into these new kind of gig jobs that were popping up everywhere. So he decided he wanted to be the foremost authority on gig opportunities and like gig economy education, I guess you could say. So both for consumers who are interested in using gig services, and for people who were interested in providing gig services, like becoming a whatever, So he came to us and he presented this kind of opportunity, and he said, what do you guys think you can do with this? And we did some research, and there was, because this was a couple of years ago, and the gig economy has just grown so much since then. At the time, there were tons of opportunities to write content for keywords that were not really competitive yet. So if you think of something like Uber, of course, it's very competitive, but there were so many longer tail keywords related to both the more kind of like notable gig brands, and sort of the like accessing the information, or I guess providing the information about lesser known or newer gig brands as well. So bottom line, there was an enormous amount of opportunity, and we were tasked with, targeting those keywords and basically building the site for him. I don't mean that literally. There was another agency that did all the technical work, but we had this very like blank slate, and we did get to weigh in a little bit on the technical sort of setup. The other agency that did the site development was phenomenal and really knew what they were doing. So they handled most of the sort of like designing and building the framework of the site, but we were almost 100% responsible for all of the content on the site. So I say almost 100% because that other agency did a little bit, and then our client said, actually, why don't you guys just take it over? So we were doing anywhere from 6 to 24 articles a week at various points throughout the kind of ramp up period, and then ramp up to launch period, and then immediately after launch. So that kind of brings us to the project itself. Do you want me to kind of dive into the details of the project and how we structured it and what we did, or?
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about that.
Okay. So we had we had kind of carte blanche. I mean, I won't say that. That's actually not accurate. We had a lot of freedom in how we did this project. So our client is phenomenal. He's so smart. He's just educated himself so well about SEO. So he's so fun to partner with because he gets it. That's not to say that our other clients don't. They wouldn't be working with us if they didn't understand SEO and its value. But this client is somebody who really gets into sort of the nitty gritty. So he actually did some of the keyword research, and he really partnered with us to sort of identify the strategy and the best opportunities, meaning which brands to target first, which what sort of approach to take, like how many posts per week, and should we be doing general gig work, gig economy, sort of like informational posts, or should we be talking about specific brands and things like that. So we kind of sat down with him and we said, look, this is a huge landscape. We recommend starting here. He gave us some guidance on his preferences, as to like where we start and where we sort of, where we create content that will be the foundational content of the site, and like kind of where we focus in that sense. And we got started about 3 months before the site launched. So we were writing, as I said, quite a few articles a month. And he had a huge library by the time he launched the site, which is fairly unusual.
I think it was like over 70 articles that you guys had launched with.
That sounds right. Yeah, I think it was, I want to say it was like 72 articles. I don't know why that number comes to mind, but yes, it was a huge library of really solid content. And that's really unusual because it takes a certain amount of trust for a client to be able to invest in their content for so long, for so much content before not just like before they know they're going to see a return on it, because that takes some time even after the site is launched, but before they even know that they're starting to build toward a return. He really gave us a unique opportunity to sort of test a hypothesis we had about the advantages of building momentum before a site is actually launched by creating a library of really high quality, in-depth content that would be available from day one of the site's kind of life. So that was a really kind of fun experiment for us to do. And we're really grateful that he put his trust in us. And it really paid off for him too. So anyway, we continued to do content after the launch. We did content for him pretty much until COVID started. And then he shifted our resources back toward his original site temporarily. And now we're picking it up again. So it's been fun to see how the momentum kind of has ebbed and flowed a little bit along, like seasonally and kind of along with what's going on in the world. And we've been able to sort of jump back in as he's needed us over the last 2 years. So I don't know. I hope he's not like offended by me saying this if he hears this, but it kind of feels like our site too. Like where I'm very sort of emotionally invested in the site after all the, after all the thought and all the strategic sort of, I want to say like maneuvering, but that's not, but we've been so invested in this brand from before it even officially existed. So it's a really kind of special project to me. And I think to Heather, who's been the editor on it since we started working on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you worked on it from the very beginning and really helped really started the site from scratch.
We did.
Can we dig into that a little bit more? Because something I think that's really interesting about this case study is that we started it from scratch. And I think, when you're new to creating content or just when you want to start a new website, the hardest part I feel like is getting started and I think that's kind of the biggest barrier to kind of get over. So could we talk about that kind of initial setup? maybe it's even
Yeah.
like talking a little bit about which CMS you decided to use, how you set it up, and just kind of overall best practices and how you set up a website.
Definitely. Yeah. So I just want to reiterate again that we
Mhm.
didn't actually do the setup. So I don't want to take credit for
Yeah.
something we didn't do, but we did weigh in. And I can also share sort of the best practices that they adhere to that we also recommend to
Mhm.
other clients. So the number one, I think there's two really important things to setting up a website in a way that is teeing it up for SEO success. The first is the CMS. And there's a lot of good CMSs out there, but my personal preference is WordPress because it gives you the flexibility to customize the site through both sort of, custom design that in this case the agency did, but also through plugins that allow you to have really diverse features that you otherwise would have to pay someone to sort of custom code for you. And it would be a ton of work. So the second thing, so these two sort of go hand in hand. So the second thing that's really important for, teeing up a site for SEO success is the organization of the site and how it enables a positive user experience. So by that, I mean, things, navigation is clear, it's easy to get where you want to go, you're sort of excuse me, you're sort of anchored on every page, like where you are. And I don't mean necessarily with breadcrumbs, but like if you land on a page or even you land on a home page, you kind of know what the page is, what you can expect to find there. You have a good sense of how to navigate around to sort of find what you're looking for. So they did a great job with things like just the overall design of the site, but then things like the search function, tagging and categorization of posts, the sort of the layout of the actual post page. I thought they did a great job on. It's very clear. It's not, I see a lot of sites where it's very distracting. They're sort of like they have all these features on the page that they think are keeping people on the site, but they sort of jump the shark a little bit. And it's such a busy page that you're kind of like, I don't want to deal with this. So it's clear and easy to read, easy to navigate, well organized, easy to browse and sort and search for what you're looking for. So I think those are all the kind of best practices that we recommend. It does not have to be WordPress. That's just kind of my personal preference. There are other great CMSs out there who can do, which can do all these features. But the other agency that we worked with implemented all these things and really put a lot of thought and care into the way that the site was designed to be user-friendly, and by extension, sort of because of the clean site architecture and go to organization, it was Google crawler spider friendly. So that that kind of is a two sides of the same coin, but that whole coin improves the ranking potential, because those are ranking factors both directly and indirectly.
Mhm. Yeah, and I would add to that for CMSs. I mean, here at Growth Machine, we use Webflow, which is great. It's actually my
Mhm.
first time using Webflow. But where I do think WordPress is really good is most people already know how to use it. So I think if you're
Yeah.
starting a site and you're hoping to eventually hire freelance writers or other people to help you maintain the site,
Hmm.
there's less training involved. Like people already know
Yeah.
how to jump in and add posts and stuff.
Yeah, it also depends
Yeah.
on what you're looking to accomplish with the site. So,
Mhm.
for example, when we set up Cup and Leaf, we had a very clear, very narrow focus, which was we wanted to write good content, put it up, and have it direct people to, and have it convert well. So we just basically wanted to educate tea drinkers and then send them to the product page if they were interested in purchasing. Um, this site, this case study site, was just a little bit more robust, I think, in what it was trying to achieve. So, for example, it has content about dozens of different topics, all under this gig economy umbrella, but different brands, different types of gig work, different sort of broader, like more generalized content about like, what is the gig economy? How do you get into the gig economy? What do you need to know about the, those sorts of things. So there was more, it was just more of like a beast of a site. And that is not something like, sort of going into it, knowing that that's what they were trying to accomplish. It wasn't sort of a simpler, more streamlined blog. I wouldn't recommend a simple, more streamlined tool like Webflow for a site like the one we're talking about. So it, the CMS discussion is one that I think is very, or rather the CMS recommendation is one that I think is very specific to the context and the goals of the business or the site. So I don't, like I said, WordPress is my personal preference. It's not necessarily the best fit. If you're trying to get a website up quickly and something that's really user-friendly, and you can go from no site at all to a pretty decent looking site by the end of the day, I say go with Webflow. Don't go with WordPress. If you want to build a whole content-based business, that's just kind of like I said, kind of a beast in a good way. WordPress is probably more capable of handling that and giving you more flexibility and more functionality, more diverse functionality, without custom coding and things like that.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts on sites on CMSs like Squarespace?
Hate it.
I like the hot take. Why?
I think that there is a point where too much simplicity, where you trade simplicity for, I was going to say sort of like functionality. That's not true, but like you almost get so simple in the user interface, in the admin interface, that you just so severely limit your ability to make your site look unique. And so I think Webflow, if you're looking for a simple CMS that is very user-friendly, and if you're a beginner to this whole content thing, and you're not, you don't have the budget to hire somebody, I think Webflow does the best job of threading the needle between like very easy, very user-friendly, and very pared down so that it's not overwhelming, but also capable of being customizable and setting up your site to look like your site, not like, oh, another site on Squarespace. And to be fair, I haven't had as much experience on Squarespace as I have on Webflow or WordPress, but I've had enough experience on Squarespace to know that it just limits me, I feel. I hate the block editor concept as well. So WordPress tries to force that on you, but there's a plugin that you can use to suppress the blocks. I think some paradoxically would argue that the blocks and the way Squarespace is set up actually gives you more flexibility and more customization, because, for example, you in classic WordPress or in Webflow, you can kind of have like, text, image, text, or like an image here and some text next to it, but you can't have like an image carousel or anything like that without the blocks sort of can be anything, like they can build these blocks to be anything you want them to be. But I don't know, like I don't like how I find that it's prone to a lot of errors. The blocks make it really tough to really write solid content. The blocks make it much easier to write flashy content. And so quality and flashiness don't always have to be mutually exclusive, but they often are. I think that's really what it boils down to. So I'm not a huge fan of Squarespace.
Yeah. Oh, and in the show notes, we'll be sure to include, we have the plugin that you've recommended for WordPress.
Yes,
for the block
it's called the WordPress Classic Editor plugin.
Okay. Cool.
I love it. It allows you to just write content and stick some pictures in and let the content really be, clean, I guess. The way I was talking about what I like about Webflow, where it's just sort of like, there isn't a lot of flash and a lot of image carousels and stuff. You can totally do that if you want. It'll probably slow down your site like crazy. So that's a whole other discussion. But I guess circling back to your original question, another thing that we always recommend in terms of best practices for setting up a site is to be aware of site speed. That's a huge ranking factor now. And mobile usability, sort of whether the site is mobile friendly is another huge ranking factor, which I believe all Webflow themes are, they're set up for mobile, and almost all reputable WordPress themes these days are set up for mobile as well.
Yeah, I think so. That would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well,
I imagine Squarespace is too. I'm not trying to mislead people on Squarespace. I'm sure it's mobile friendly as well.
Right. Cool. So something else I wanted to discuss was milestones of success, or KPIs that you agreed on. So something you touched on earlier was this idea that, it's not very common, right, to work with, for someone to work with an agency or an agency to work with a client where there's so much trust involved in terms of a lot of upfront content being created before site launch, or just, having that kind of close relationship for quite a while before launch. So could you tell me a little bit about the KPIs that you worked through, maybe before launch? We'll start with before launch.
Yeah. So I think everyone's probably assuming there's a traffic number. That would be my guess. That's what I would assume.
Right.
I think we had a traffic goal, but not a KPI in the sense that if we missed that goal, the project was considered a failure. The reason for that is because you can't control Google. I mean, you can follow all the best practices, but you can't control when a major algorithm update will destroy you. That's obviously an extreme case, but we don't promise traffic numbers. We agree to traffic goals, and we did have a traffic goal within, I think, 6 months of launch. We had a target.
And it was to get to 100,000 monthly visitors, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But then I think in terms of like actual hard KPIs that we were holding ourselves to, and our client was holding us to, it had to do more about, it had to do more with following the best practices. So things like making sure all of the content was produced on time and to a quality standard, making sure that the keywords were relevant and within certain bounds of like difficulty and volume. So they were qualified opportunities in that sense. Things more along those lines. And those were more, not collaborative in the sense that like our client wasn't actually working on them with us, but we were sort of keeping him in the loop a lot more. So part of our process is to show the client the content plan, including, the keyword that we've planned for a certain date, the volume and difficulty of that keyword, and some brief summary of how we plan to sort of write to that keyword. So he was able to see every couple of months, he was able to see what we were planning to write, make sure the keywords were in line with what he felt was best for his brand and his business, and make sure that, and our approach was sort of the right direction, and also make sure that the keywords were like, frankly, worth the money that he's paying, because good content is expensive. And so we weren't going to write an article for him for a keyword that gets 10 to 20 searches a month. That's just not going to pay off for him. So there were things like that we sort of agreed upon in advance, and that he knew our sort of vetting process from his other projects that he'd worked on with us. And then
so you would prioritize keywords that had at least a couple hundred searches per month.
Oh yeah, I think early on we were actually going for very high volume, 1,000 or more searches a month, and very low difficulty. So like under 20 would be ideal, and that's on a scale of, it's indexed on a scale of 100.
Mhm.
That wasn't always feasible, but I think we capped it, or we cut it off rather. Like the volume floor was probably around 500. I don't remember exactly, but we were really going for kind of a scorch the earth. Well, not kind of, we were exactly going for a scorch the earth strategy, which meant
Yeah.
if we set our sites on a theme or a brand or a concept or whatever, we wanted to do, we scheduled an article for every single viable keyword. And by viable, I mean, above that volume floor and below that difficulty maximum. So it kind of ran the gamut. So we would have like a keyword with 15,000 queries a month. And then the next article would be a keyword with like 1,200 queries a month. And then maybe later we would have a keyword. I don't think we went below 1,000 at first. But we were extremely thorough. So the volume and difficulty thresholds were pretty set, but the actual like keywords that we were writing were sort of all over the place in terms of, sometimes it was a volume of 15,000 and sometimes it was a volume of like 1,000 or maybe even a little like 750 or something. But, I think one of the things we really kept in mind was how much he was investing in this and making sure that the investment was going to pay off really well for him. Making sure that the ROI on this project was going to be very, very strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now I want to start talking about traffic. So, so we were working on content for about 3 months before the site was published.
Yeah.
Launched the site with a bunch of content, I think around 72 articles. But I have it here in Google Analytics that by week 6, they already had 19,000 monthly visitors.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot to me.
It's a lot. We planned this project for so long. We worked on this project for so long before it was launched. And we had these, we thought, somewhat realistic, but still somewhat aggressive expectations. And the traffic just blew those expectations out of the water. I would never in a million years promise a client that by week 6, they would have anywhere near 19,000 monthly visitors. That's really impressive for a brand. I mean, remember, it was a brand new site, did not exist. It wasn't like a site that we were reviving or a site that had been sort of plodding along and we were taking over and writing optimized, keyword targeted content. This site did not exist. It existed in a fairly competitive space. It was not the most competitive category you can be in, but it certainly was an area of massive opportunity. So you can expect that other people were trying to get in there as well. Other people recognize the same opportunity that or the same potential that our client did. And this was sort of what I was talking about, where we were sort of able to put our, not theories, but like it was sort of an extreme experiment in the strength of our processes and our best practices. And so we were thrilled to see how well it paid off.
Yeah.
I want to be clear that we can't take all the credit for this because there was another agency setting up this website and doing all the technical design and or technical setup and design and all that kind of stuff. So I don't want to say that like content was fully responsible for that, but it was a big part of it. And having this huge library of really authoritative, relevant content.
And that probably linked to each other too,
right,
wherever it was relevant. Yeah.
Right. We also, if I recall, we had a couple of backlinks placed from, obviously from his first site, the ride sharing site, which was very authoritative, is very authoritative. And then I can't remember, we had a couple of other like really strong backlinks, and he may have also, I know that he has a backlinking, or he has since implemented a backlinking program, or a backlink building program, I mean. But I think he may have been doing that pretty early on, so that helped as well. But it was kind of like this, you know, you always have this question, like, if you were in a vacuum and you had almost no boundaries to doing everything the right way and sort of like at the maximum, you know, what would happen? Like, is there kind of a threshold where there's diminishing marginal returns? Like, there may be, but we certainly did not hit it with this site. So it was really interesting to see that this very aggressive strategy does actually really pay off.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about banking content for a little bit.
Yeah.
So, you know, they banked about 70 articles at launch.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone can do that, or maybe not everyone should.
Mm-hmm.
If you were starting a new site by yourself or with a very limited resources,
Mm-hmm.
is there, is there some good guidance on how many articles you should launch with? Or is it
Oh,
more
that's a
important
great
to just
question.
launch?
Um, I think you know, I'm going to answer the same way for like almost every question like this. I think it depends on what your goals are.
Yeah.
Um, if you are in a relatively uncompetitive space and you just want to kind of see what you can do, like if, for example, if your blog is supporting an e-commerce store, like your blog is not your whole business, I would say just launch.
Mm-hmm.
If you are sitting around worrying about best practices or worrying about how much content to launch versus actually launching, I would say just launch. I think this was different because he saw this enormous potential of this space that was like quickly getting saturated, and um, it was getting more and more competitive by the day. And he kind of understood the potential based on his work on his other site. So he decided banking some content so that he could really, for example, he could start an aggressive backlinking campaign right away. There was lots of, you know, there were lots of articles to link to. There were lots of resources to offer sort of to the world to start getting the site out there. I also just kind of want to note that we did intend to bank a pretty substantial amount of content, but we ended up banking more than we planned because the site launch was delayed. So no one set out to launch the site with 70 articles. That probably, if someone said like, I want to launch a site with 100 articles already written, I probably would steer them away from that, because I would rather see a site. There's a lot of benefits to the site being online, gaining exposure, gaining, you know, domain age, testing the waters, you know, seeing what works and what doesn't work. So I would say, like, as far as the question of should you bank content, yes, with an asterisk.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you have a really clear strategy on why you're banking content, I would say no. I would actually lean toward no. This was a pretty unique situation, and he had a very clear strategy and a clear objective on kind of like what he was trying to accomplish with this site. So it made some sense.
That's interesting.
But my personal opinion or my personal, you know, sort of advice, and there may be people who disagree with me, would be, if you're not sure, don't bank content. Just don't launch a site with no content on it. But
Right.
write an article and then keep writing articles. So if you're not sure you're going to be able to keep a regular publishing schedule, that would be a great reason to bank content. If you, frankly, if you don't know if you're going to be able to keep a regular publishing schedule, you might want to rethink having a blog or launching a site, you know, launching a content-based site. But if you, for example, you're going to launch the site and then you have to pivot for 6 months and work on developing a product or something, that would be a great reason to bank some content. Launch a site with like 20 articles on it, or whatever, like some decent amount of content to keep people engaged and coming back. And then you can get back to it when your time and energy allows. But 9 times out of 10, my recommendation would be launch the site, make sure you have 1 or 2 articles on it, and then keep a very consistent and as aggressive as you can publishing schedule. So like we advise about 2 articles a week is ideal every week.
Yeah. And it's the thing I've done in the past when I've launched blogs for brands, is kind of following that rule of thumb of publishing twice a week, and then kind of working backwards to launching with, so essentially launching the site with 10 to 12 articles already banked.
Yeah, I think
with the
that's a great
thinking,
strategy.
yeah, with the thinking that like, okay, now we are a couple weeks ahead of production schedule. And if we know we're going to publish twice a week, we have a nice steady flow of content. And then plus that way we're not launching the site with nothing. There's enough content to refer to each other. And then if you're a user just going to the website and you're scrolling through, you'll see like, oh, okay, there's a bunch of content here. Like this isn't some weird website that has one article and they publish once a week.
Yeah, I think it also, like, that's a great point. It depends on how much visibility you think your blog is going to get right away. So if you're a really established brand and your website gets a ton of content, and let's say you plan to, or I'm sorry, a ton of traffic, and let's say you plan to share your content like on the homepage and on your social channels and in your newsletter, then you should be banking more, because you're going to work so hard to get people on the site. You're going to get them there. They're going to read the one article. They're hopefully going to like the article. And then they're going to be like, oh, cool. What else can I read? Oh, nothing. Oh, I guess this isn't such a great blog after all, you know? So you want to make sure that there's enough meat on the site if you expect people to come and you plan to promote it aggressively and you have a big audience to promote it to. So all of these like caveats are really why I say it depends on the context and it sort of depends on the case as to whether or not I would recommend banking content and how much.
Cool. Yeah. I do want to finish up our chat on KPIs and or on traffic. So I do want to finish up our thought on traffic. So by week 6, they had about 19,000 monthly visitors. By month 6, they got to over 100,000 monthly visits. So we got to 105,000.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. I mean, I know they wanted to reach 100,000 monthly visitors as soon as possible. And as we were approaching the 6 months, were you guys thinking, oh, I think we're gonna hit it pretty soon?
Yeah. We were, I think we were cautiously optimistic the whole time once we saw those week 6 numbers, actually. That was the point where we were like, this is definitely possible. We have to keep doing what we're doing. I think we actually ramped up content even more after the launch of the site. So we went from, I think we were at either 9 or 12 articles a month when the site launched. And we at one point ramped up to 24, I'm sorry, not a month, a week. We ramped up to 24 articles a week. So our client, like I said, had an immense amount of trust and he was just all in on this project. So that really allowed us to do everything we had to do and everything, you know, he needed us to do to get him to the traffic numbers where, you know, where he wanted to be.
Cool. And then I'm also seeing here that it looks like for around, we'll just say around 5-6 months, these monthly sessions hovered around 120,000, which is great.
Yeah.
But then very suddenly in a single month, and I think this was, so at this point, it's what, 7 to 8 months after launch.
Yeah.
They had, 140,000 sessions. But here's what it is. I'll start over here. After being live for about 8-ish months, traffic exploded and they suddenly had 250,000 organic monthly sessions. So the traffic kind of, at some point, it essentially doubled over a month. What happened there?
Yeah, I think, so it's hard to say, like, there's always this inflection point in SEO, like in SEO growth. So you see this like gradual kind of plodding growth. And then there's always the inflection point is where the growth rate, like not the actual growth, but the growth rate. So the angle of the curve drastically changes. That,
And we've referred to this before as the critical authority threshold,
yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And that will be
So
that's in the show notes.
yes, there's a whole blog post about it. That's hard. That's hard to predict, but that is, it's always something that happens. We see it between months, I'd say about 6 and 12 on average. And it's impossible to pin it down any more than that. You know, it's not like on month 8, everyone always experiences this critical, you know, it always hits their critical authority threshold. It's very difficult to predict. It depends a lot on your publishing frequency and the category that you're, you know, the niche that you're playing in. So like what other people are doing and how competitive it is and things like that. But that's always the best part of any project, is to see when the traffic just kind of like, it's like it hits another gear almost, you know, like I'm not great at like car metaphors, so that was probably the wrong choice. But so if anyone is listening and is really good with cars and they're like, that's not right, just bear with me.
And maybe that person should start a car blog.
Yeah, right. We can help you start a really successful car blog. So anyway, there's this critical authority threshold, this kind of inflection point in the traffic graph where we see the growth rate just change. Like there's no, I can't tell you why. I mean, no one can tell you why, but there's this momentum that hits kind of all at once, where Google all of a sudden says effectively like, yeah, I've been watching this site for a long time. I've been like gradually giving it a little bit more leeway in ranking and a little bit more and a little bit more, and it has not let me down yet. So I guess this is a really authoritative site. So now I'm going to kind of boost it up. So that's the point where we've seen rankings start to, you know, not always like hit the first page, but they've been kind of moving their way gradually toward the first page. And then all of a sudden we start to see more and more first page rankings for bigger and bigger volume keywords. And then the traffic follows suit.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So now I also want to talk about website maintenance, or just kind of the ongoing work with this client. So once we've, you know, gotten to this point, we have the ongoing work. Are there best practices in ongoing site maintenance with respect to SEO and content?
Oh yeah. Watch what your competitors are doing for sure. Something that was successful 6 months ago may not be successful now. Make sure that you are keeping kind of your finger on the pulse of what's going on in your category. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but when we got to the COVID era, things obviously changed quite a bit. So, you know, when all the shelter in place lockdowns started, no one was taking Ubers. And so you know, that's a huge part of the, you know, a huge proportion of the content on the site. We obviously didn't want to keep sinking resources into writing Uber content, but we did want to start sinking resources into things like food delivery, grocery delivery. There were a ton of gig economy jobs and needs that just skyrocketed at that point. So we had to sort of shift from, you know, knowing that Uber and ride sharing were like really strong opportunities that we could always kind of fall back on, and making sure that we were following this like scorch the earth kind of strategy, where anytime a new Uber keyword popped up, we made sure to write about it, to sort of ignoring a lot of the keywords that previously had been very strong opportunity, you know, very valuable opportunities for us. And pivoting toward ones that in the past had been good opportunity. You know, something like Uber Eats was always a good opportunity, but it's at a whole new level now. And things like Instacart, or like online tutoring, Amazon Prime delivery. I mean, we had to really think about what was going on in the world or in the country. It's a US based site that serves a US audience. And think about like, where the demand has shifted, because it was a huge, like cataclysmic shift in demand. People were losing their jobs. They needed to pay the rent. So they got gig economy jobs. What kind of gig economy jobs were they looking for? What sorts of shopping habits were changing? How were consumer shopping habits changing? Well, they were going for more delivery, whereas more people probably went to the store every week to get their groceries. All of a sudden, people were ordering. They were ordering more from Amazon. They were ordering more from Shipt, Target's version of Prime, kind of. So these were keywords that were always on our radar, but they were never what I would say like the highest. They were valuable. I don't want to, overstate. I don't want to shortchange them, but they were not the ones that I always kind of thought of as like our bread and butter. They weren't the huge like monster keywords, and then all of a sudden they were. And we had to shift to making sure that in maintaining the site, we were maintaining it in a way that was both timely and evergreen. So we don't actually write a whole lot of articles that are like COVID related. We don't say like, here's where to get your groceries if you're in a shelter in place state or something like that. But we know that people are looking for information about like, what is Shipt? How do I use Shipt? Or like, what is this app or this service? How do I use it? And it's stuff that is in really high demand right now, but we also write it in a way that will meet the demand in 5 years when hopefully all of this is behind us and life looks different and normal again, whatever normal is. So, I mean, I think it's a combination of remembering the overall strategy, which for this site was this sort of scorch the earth and make sure that no opportunity is untapped, but also needing to adjust to the context and to changing demands and in some cases seasonality. This wasn't a very seasonally driven site, so that didn't really apply very strongly here, but it sure did when COVID started.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I think the idea of, creating this content sort of for COVID or the COVID era, but also ensuring that it's still evergreen, that, if someone's coming to this site 5 years later, they're not seeing, oh, how to do all these things through COVID, where that might be the reason someone's going to the site, but they don't need to read that in the content to get value out of it.
Right. I think if you read something about delivery groceries in September of 2020, it's like, it goes without saying that it's a COVID problem solution situation,
Right.
So we don't really, for other clients, I have done some like very COVID specific content, so it's like, it actually addresses COVID and the problems that a quarantine or shelter in place poses. We haven't done a ton of that for this site because we don't have to. I mean, we can still write content that is evergreen, but it's also especially relevant now. And it just is addressing the increased demand for information about these topics.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then I do want to end on this note. So what about this client experience did you learn and did you apply to future clients or programs?
So I kind of think about this as, I sort of touched on this earlier, but it's kind of like a controlled research study on the effectiveness of our strategy and our like best practices. And this was a very unusual situation where we could do everything the way it sort of to the maximum, I guess, and really have the ideal environment for testing out all of our concepts and our best practices. And we saw that it worked. I mean, so that, we didn't really doubt it, but it sure is nice to see that everything that we, run our business by is actually like something that works in the wild. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but it was this controlled study in a sense, and we got very good results. And it was very nice to see that. It was nice to be able to try it in this environment, because we've done this before with Cup and Leaf, starting a site from scratch, applying all the best practices with no kind of like conflicting stakeholder, or conflicting opinions or anything like that. But Cup and Leaf was in a much less competitive space. So it was nice to see that despite a higher level of competition in this category, our best practices really do work very well, despite a higher sort of like level of challenge. And then I think it also kind of gave us a good sense of how flexible our best practices are. So, I mean, it's not just this, but it was like this site alongside all the other sites that we've worked on. We've seen our strategies and our processes work on new sites, established sites, with lots of content, with less content. It does change the pace of progress, obviously. And then, of course, in competitive categories or categories with kind of more white space opportunities. But I mean, all in all, I think this was a great proof of concept more than anything. I don't think there was any one thing that we did that I said like, Eureka, now we have to apply this to every client going forward. It was more of this, just like, what happens if we do everything the way we think it's supposed to be done? Are there going to be any hindrances? Or is anything going to sort of fall short? Or are we going to see the results that we expected? And happily, we saw the results that we were not just expecting, but like hoping for. We saw better than what we expected. So, it's not easy to do great content, consistent publishing, establish really clear authority. It's not easy to do all of those things the right way, but when you do them, it really pays off.
Great. Well, thanks for your time, Nora.
Yeah, you're welcome. This was fun.
Yeah. We'll do this again soon. All right.
Okay. Wonderful.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.